Welcome to another unscripted casual conversation. And we have the privilege today of talking to Tim McDonald. Tim McDonald is the General Counsel of Construction Australia for Lendlease. Tim, did I get that right?
Got it. Nailed it. Thanks, Horace. Hi.
Great to see you again. Hey, can you tell us a little more about what you do? Because I think it's going to be really interesting to set the framework of what we want to talk about a little bit later.
Sure. So, so I look after the legal function for the construction businesses of Lendlease in Australia, as the title suggests. And that canvasses a few different businesses, but primarily, it's looking after large projects in Australia. We're into urban regen, and therefore, projects like Barangaroo, commercial office towers, stadiums, hospitals, all the way through to O&M services, so looking after roads and tunnels and things like that. So everything that goes along with those sorts of projects. Obviously things go wrong, so I'm a transactional person, constantly working on new transactions, but also dealing with the issues that inevitably follow in that space. And so I'd like to call it issues rich most of the time, lots of interesting things going on. And that's what I enjoy. Got a really talented team of lawyers who are all very good at what they do. So it makes it a pleasure.
That's really cool. So Tim, you're quite well known in the Australian innovation space for legal tech. Now, obviously that's not your core role because you are the General Counsel for Construction Australia and you're doing all of this innovation sort of on the side. How much of your time is divided between your day job versus your innovation job?
So I started, I guess, dabbling in the legal tech space a few years ago. And it really came from a place of passion in that, it was clear to me doing various roles at Lendlease. And I did spend some time in the business in a commercial role that really opened my eyes up to where the pinch points were for both the business and the legal team. And I became absolutely convinced that we had to do things better. And so I perhaps foolishly decided to pursue a project internally to try and transform how we do things in the procurement space, particularly when it comes to contracts, because that was a sort of natural affinity of mine. And so it has become a serious side hustle within Lendlease for me. It is something that I do in the gaps, and it's often something that I do, frankly, late at night once everything else is kind of calmed down. But I guess I'm passionate enough about the cause that I manage to find time to do it no matter what. So I will, in the middle of all of the chaos of being GC and everything that comes with it, I will take an automation meeting smack bang in the middle and carve out that time, because I think it's really important. Unless you do find that time to try and move forward with these sorts of things, you're just going to be stuck in the bog and never crawl out. So, and that getting that critical mass and seeing progress has frankly fanned the flames for me, to make me keep going, to make me a dog with a bone to try and make this project succeed.
Tell us more about exactly what that project involved, because I know only the tiniest tip of the iceberg on this one. So what's the objective of the project? What's been involved? What was the state before the project and how has it ended up today?
My project's in the scale of everything that Lendlease does in the construction world. It's just a small part, but it's an important part in many ways. Lendlease is built on procurement, so we don't self-perform construction work. We subcontract it out into the market. Therefore, we go and sign tens of thousands of subcontracts every year to deliver our projects, subcontracts and consultancy agreements, etc. So, rewind a couple of years ago, that in terms of producing the subcontract documentation, getting it out to market, assessing tenders, making amendments, negotiation through to execution, setting up projects with their special conditions to suit, the requirements of clients, etc. That was all very manual. It was very analog, and the legal team was just absolutely swamped dealing with, requests from projects from the business to negotiate, amend, unlock templates, etc. It was just madness. So the idea of this project is to try and automate as much of that process as possible. So we're moving away from working in Word documents when it comes to production, negotiation, execution of subcontracts and consultancy agreements, trying to move all the way through to self-service by the business, web-based questionnaires, to take a document through from issuing a draft to the market to assessing tenders and assessing risk, seeking approvals internally, and then producing a document which conforms with the final negotiations, the approved positions, etc. And frankly, success is, if it doesn't touch the legal team at all, awesome. My legal team does not want to nor need to see low risk subcontracts. Occasionally, it will need to see the tricky ones.
Mm-hmm.
The aim was to try and achieve an 80-20, 90-10 kind of rule, where we build in enough functionality into our automated templates, etc., and the process, so the business could truly self-service. And the aim is to not ever have to go into a Word document. Fast forward to where we are now, we are using this platform on our live projects. It's now BAU in Australia. And we're still achieving scale because our projects, we haven't pushed it into all of our legacy projects. So projects often take years to deliver, but certainly everything that comes online now is in system. So we're using it on more and more projects of scale and complexity. And what's really interesting is that we're already, even though we're still building out options in our platform, we're already seeing only 15% of our subcontracts now coming into the legal team for some sort of intervention.
Wow.
85% are fully self-serviced.
Wow.
So that's either a standard template or a standard template which has been augmented through clause bank options and associated approval workflows. So the users are experiencing, the data shows that it's 3 to 4 times faster to deal with the procurement side of things, procurement documentation side of things in system than it was in the old school method. And that's before you take into account things like e-signature, which can crunch your timescale even further.
I am so impressed. Color me impressed. Whatever color that might be.
Thanks, Doris. It probably sounds cooler than it actually is, but I'm into it because it might seem like there's small wins, but they make big impacts on a lot of people.
I think it's not a small win at all, and I'm a data kind of guy. So for me, when you say 85% of contracts don't even have to go to a legal team, my eyebrows rise, and I have lots of questions stemming from that. The first one is, statistically and from a data perspective, how much deviation do you have in these 85% of contracts? So do they deviate much from the standard form? Do you have you got a massive bank of possibilities catering for all of the outcomes? What happens? No. There is variability for sure, but what we focused on was probably picking the top 10 things that need to change based on historical data, based on what we know that the legal team was fielding. In terms of the market always asks for these things. Yep.
Now we focused on coding those things really well.
Yep.
Including having options within those 10. So under the banner of X, call it liquidated damages for delay. We've got all of the permutations and combinations that we would commonly see out there coded, because that will come up every time. What's surprising is that we fully expected to have to go and build out those top 10, I guess, to give us a decent start. But we fully expected the full development of the optionality menu, which was going to take some time. We thought that was going to be required to get to those sorts of numbers in terms of the 85-15 kind of split. What's been interesting is that this hasn't been required so far. But the other interesting comment I'd make in terms of we put a lot of time into the user interface in our platform, and the users for us, and I don't know you don't like that term too much, Horace, but the users.
No. I think the term user is hilarious in the context. So for the audience, Tim and I, before this recording started, we were talking about how there are only 2 industries in the world that refer to their customers as users. The first is the tech industry, and the second, Tim?
Drug dealers, obviously.
Obviously. But then the users and the user experience and the user interface.
We spent a lot of time working on that, the look and feel to the users who are individuals on our projects, who are responsible for procurement. Once you start deviating from a standard template, the platform starts to get shouty at you. It starts to have pop-ups, red text, warnings, and then it steps up to pop-ups, warnings. Oh, and then you actually need to seek approval for this. Again, fairly shouty. It's a two-step process. So if something requires an approval, it will flag it when you trip it, but then it will re-ask you at the end, do you really want to seek approval for this? And it will actually ask you to hit a button seeking that approval, and then ask you for rationale as to why. So I think that kind of escalating level of shoutiness coming off the screen actually helps the user to understand how significant those departures are in terms of risk, change in risk. And that helps in decision making and drives behaviors.
It's brilliant. There's so much we can pry into, but instead I'm going to move the topic to
and I should say, Horace,
yes, please,
because it sounds like we're kind of berating our users. The other really important part of that is not to just say you can't do it. It's to say, well, you can do it, but bear these things in mind, and here's why. It actually gives you the guidance that sits behind why that is an issue.
So it's an educational tool as well.
It's actually an educational tool at the same time, because otherwise it just becomes this black box, which is just system says no. So it's still an informed choice.
You have obviously put a lot of thought and a lot of care into designing the system, and it shows in your numbers. I think it's a testament of how well you've done. But I want to take the conversation to a slightly different point, because I was on WhatsApp with a friend of mine, and he is going through a sort of automation project for his organization at the moment. And the question he asked was, at the moment, automation of contracts is really focused on kind of your high volume, low value documents, the ones that keep on happening day after day after day. And so there's very obvious value from automating it. And we can kind of leave aside the obvious question of, well, what about low volume, high value contracts? Let's leave that aside for now, but then focus on this question, which is, how do you decide what information to give the user on the interface? And you have kind of 2 broad camps to choose from. You can give user very specific drafting, which tend to be pretty inflexible. Or you can give users the conceptual rationale and then let them come up with the exact language themselves. What do you think of those 2 approaches, and what would be the factual circumstances that will be more appropriate for each one. So specific drafting versus conceptual guidance.
I guess it all comes down to who the audience is. So, if I just draw parallels with the platform I was talking about before, where those using the system, the users, are not legal people. They're not legally trained. And so absolutely go for conceptual every day of the week.
Oh, hang on. I thought you were going to say give them specific drafting so they can drag and drop.
No, they don't want to engage with the drafting. They don't care about the drafting. They only care about the concepts. Because at the end of the day, it's what the drafting means that's important. And if you can communicate that meaning in fewer words, then that's going to be more efficient. But if the user is the legal team, and there are times when this is the case, then you'll never get a lawyer convinced by a concept. They're going to want to see the actual words. Otherwise, they won't trust the system. So if you've got a legal person engaging with the system, then more detail is better. They will want to see the drafting that sits behind the options.
That is so interesting, because I think we're thinking about two different interfaces there. You seemed like you were thinking about the interface of the questionnaire, whereas I was thinking about the interface of you already have a document and what do you want to present to your user so that they can change what's in the document. So interesting. So even the user interface influences the design decision between how much detail do you give and what sort of information is most useful to the audience performing that task.
I think so. I mean, it depends on how much the document itself is important to the particular user you're talking about. If the output is very much the document, then there needs to be that option to see the detail for sure. Otherwise, there won't be enough trust in the output.
And I want to ask you a question which I think flows on from something you said earlier, and that is it's become BAU. What was the adoption process like in terms of going from, hey, this is a fandangled new thing, to this is now BAU?
Good question. Very slow burn. And so very slow and methodical. In a large organization like Lendlease, a global organization, complex matrix structure, lots of stakeholders, etc. It's been, a 3.5 year journey at least to get to this point where we are now, going forward scaling in Australia. So applied all of I just sort of stumbled across these principles as I was going. I made tons of mistakes along the way. But at the end of the day, what ended up being the pathway for me and my project, I should say our project, because we are a little team, is all the usual steps. Started with a proof of concept. So I knew exactly, I had what I thought was the vision for this thing. But to have proper conversations with stakeholders, I knew I needed something tangible. So I took $5,000 of legal team budget. I don't know, can't remember if it was entertainment or education. Took that money and built something really simple, which was representative of the vision. It looked like it worked. Didn't really work. It was just to represent something tangible that represented what the end state could look like. That was then the starting point for conversation with many stakeholders. That ended up turning into a Shark Tank style, pitch internally. So found that there are parts of the organisation that have some funding for innovation projects, and so built out. Ended up pitching an MVP, minimum viable product.
Yep.
So getting a little bit more funding to build something slightly bigger, slightly more tangible, slightly more persuasive, which actually validated, you know, ROI, etc. Just kept growing. So
Yeah.
lots of pitches, lots of meetings, lots of stakeholder engagement with all of the people that will need to engage with this thing. Ended up with proof of concept, minimum viable product, and then pilot 1, pilot 2, and then commitment to scale. Then we started scaling. So it was very much that kind of innovation curve
Yep.
that you see on lots of your ICT projects. And I reckon I probably spent more time doing meetings and stakeholder engagement, pitches,
Yep.
trying to get funding, keep funding, etc., than I did actually building the platform itself.
Tim, you've described the entrepreneur journey, but you might be what people call the intrapreneur, because all of this was done within the organization. And
That's
there
catchy.
is,
That's catchy.
I didn't make it up. I wish I did. I would patent it, trademark it. But
Well, it's funny.
it's,
We had a startup mentality, and we wore that as a badge of honor.
yeah.
There were points in time for this project where we had when we were in the really intense build phase, we maybe had sort of four or five people in the team working on this thing. We were homeless. We would literally wander the floors trying to find somewhere in the office to squat, and we would just like take over a neighborhood, and that would be our little startup bubble, which is kind of cool when it was in the context of a global organization.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh man, I wish I could have been there. I would have been, sipping my coffee, watching you guys work. It would have brought me great joy.
Hey, look, there
So
were times when I was very stressed about whether we were actually going to be able to pull this thing off.
yeah,
Because I sold a dream, and then all of a sudden, the hardest bit was actually, oh my god, I've got some money to actually go and do this. I hope this works.
I think what we can't forget as well is you did all of this while you were still the general counsel for Construction Australia.
Well, you know what? I think I've had three role changes over the time that I've been doing this project,
What?
Horace. So when I started it, I was a commercial and risk manager, and then various other legal roles. So it's actually the one thing that's remained constant in the last few years for me.
So tell us, what do you think is on the horizon for this project, and what do you think is on the horizon for legal technology generally?
So for this project, now that we sort of cracked how to do it, and we know that the business loves it, they just want more of it. The adoption has been fantastic, and that's because it's intuitive. So now we're just looking at what else we can do. So beyond scaling it, we're looking at various integrations with our other systems. So aggregation of data, reporting, stitching it together with other systems to make it more efficient in terms of data in, data out, those sorts of things. Also, working with the other regions. So I'm lucky in my role to connect in regularly with the other regions. So we're now looking at what we can do in the US, the UK, and Asia, in the platform we've built, and how we might take the same philosophy and roll it out elsewhere. I say roll it out. It's more than a rollout. It'd be a complete new build. But look, I guess the project. What's more exciting is, I guess, what it means in terms of, the legal team, and thinking in a more innovative way. It becomes an addiction. Once you've had some runs on the board, it becomes a way of thinking. And so for me, it's not really about the platform anymore. It's more about the philosophy of actually being able to make some change if you have enough drive to do it. And so that's something that the entire team works towards now. It's now part of our DNA. So we're looking at all sorts of other cool things we can do. We use this platform for other little side projects that we just do in our own little bubble. Give you a really good example. At the heart of our tool is a very powerful document automation tool program. What we all of a sudden had a need to produce and execute 1,000 deeds of novation recently. And rather than engaging it, we don't have the resources to produce that sort of volume of documents.
Mm.
Rather than engaging an external law firm at great cost to go and produce those 1,000 deeds of novation, we spend a little bit of time coding those documents, setting up an Excel spreadsheet, and then producing those documents automatically using the same
Wow.
system. And so go to woe, in the space of a week, we can produce those documents and then push them into DocuSign.
Wow.
So, lots of little flywheel benefits of having that sort of capability. And that's not something we would sort of broadcast as a project per se. It's just, we just go and do it. And that's really cool.
And it sounds like you've now established this base, this foundation, so that for other sort of efficiency projects, other sorts of automation projects, you can use this platform to, what you say, flywheel, to create that momentum.
They are little wins,
Mm.
but sometimes the little wins are just as important as the big wins. Being able to do a start to finish little project in a different way to, what our competitors might be doing, that's an edge. So, and when it's actually making lives of the team easier,
Yep.
that's success. We're not just going and doing stuff just because we can, because it's cool. It is actually going to, save time, mean that people aren't having to do tons of manual, work, which is extremely unsatisfying. So that's cool in itself. But I do think, to your other part of the question was the legal industry generally. The legal industry is pretty immature when it comes to tech. When you compare it to pretty much any other industry, but I think there is a hell of a lot of interest out there. There's lots of desire to do things differently. So I do think there is a bit of a groundswell pushing towards true innovation in the legal world. I think COVID's been a bit of a catalyst for that as well.
Definitely.
Even if in the short term, finding budget for big, cool new projects is slightly harder. I think once we get through that sort of COVID, challenge, I think lots of organizations will come bursting out of the blocks trying to drive change, and that's pretty exciting.
I am, first of all, just so impressed by what you've done, and I want to say thank you so much for spending time chatting with us. I do want to share one piece of wisdom which I promised that I would do in my next blog video, and that is, Tim, do you know the right way of pulling off a Post-it note?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay. Tell us, because first,
straight down.
Don't reveal. That's too soon. Well, I promised.
Sorry,
I promised someone. No. That was great. So I promised someone, Alex Robertson. Alex, if you're watching this, you do not pull from the corner. You pull, as Tim said, with a smiley face, straight down. And that ends today's very casual conversation, ending with a tip about Post-it notes. Tim, thank you once again for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you in person.
Thanks for the chat.